Let me welcome you to this first workshop session that we're going to have in practical philosophy here at the Hudson. This is the first of 12 workshops that we're going to do monthly, alternating between Stoic philosophy and Aristotelian philosophy, and focusing on real-life issues. So next month, for example, in honor of Valentine's Day, we're going to talk about different kinds of relationships, those that are just basically about people getting use out of each other, those that are oriented around pleasure, and those in which the real nature of the person is important. Now that comes from Aristotle, from the Nicomachean Ethics, and it's directly applicable to romantic relationships. So there's a lot of things in philosophy that are like that. This month I wanted to focus on New Year's resolutions because many of us have made them, some of us have broken them already.
I love how you look at me when you say that.
I'm just looking around. Odds are, statistically, most of us have broken at least one resolution in one way, right? So I wanted to keep these workshops smaller. When we do public events, sometimes they can be quite large because I wanted to have the chance to do actual workshopping of ideas using handouts and having a lot of discussion. So what we're going to do is look at Stoic practical philosophy, mainly from one of the key thinkers who's called Epictetus. And you don't need to know anything about Stoicism to get something out of this workshop. I'm going to give you some basic ideas derived from his works. You don't also have to buy it wholesale. I myself am not a Stoic, although I play one on YouTube quite often. So convincingly that some people think I am a Stoic. I'm also going to be taking over the blog Stoicism Today, which would make you think that. But I'm actually more of an Aristotelian in many respects. So I want to introduce myself very briefly. Thanks. My name is Greg Sadler, and I am a philosophy professor. I've taught for about 15 years at different places. My first teaching gig was actually in a maximum security prison, teaching for Ball State University. Then I moved down to Fayetteville State University in North Carolina. I've taught for Marist College. I'm teaching and doing some administrative work for the Global Center for Advanced Studies. In addition to that, I actually wear a lot of other hats. I'm what you could call a public philosopher. So I give lectures and lead workshops. I've been doing that for about 10 years. I'm also the president of a philosophical content production and consulting company called Reason.io. And our key idea there is putting philosophy into practice, making it applicable to people who aren't academic philosophers and don't necessarily want to go over to Marquette and take an entire course or something like that. Another thing that I do is philosophical counseling. I'm certified through the American Philosophical Practitioners Association. And in that, part of what I do is what we'll be doing in this workshop. I lead people using resources from classical and contemporary philosophy through thinking about life problems or changing a job, figuring out moral dilemmas, all those sorts of things. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, I can tell you more about that later. Now, these monthly workshops over the course of the year are provided free as a public service that we're offering through Reason.io. And like I talked about before, we're recording this as a resource for viewers and subscribers worldwide. What I would like to do in the session is we'll start out by talking just about resolutions themselves and a little bit about Stoicism, and then I'll do a bit of lecturing. I want to go over some really basic overview of the Stoic philosophical tradition, and I'll tell you about 3 core concepts that I think are really useful. And then we'll do some Q&A, just so everybody's clear about those matters. And then let's talk about resolutions themselves. We'll talk about problematic resolutions and successes and failures, all that sort of stuff from this year and from other years. Another thing I want to think about too, once we've looked at some Stoic ideas, is how would we look at resolutions that we've made in the past from a Stoic perspective? Were they good resolutions? Were they perhaps overambitious? Did we not have the resources to pull them off? And then we'll talk about how a Stoic would actually make resolutions, and we'll do some workshopping. That's what the not handouts, the worksheets are for thinking through resolutions. And it's okay, by the way, if you made a New Year's resolution that you now think might have been a little overambitious, it's perfectly fine to make a new resolution. That would actually be a very rational thing to do, rather than obstinately sticking with something that by the end of January is going to kill you. So we'll do all of that, and then we'll do, if we have time, we'll do some general discussion and any further Q&A. So before we go into Stoic philosophy, just sort of a sounding board, how many of you typically make New Year's resolutions? I do. Oh, no. So,
decided not to this year.
Yeah, well, because you knew that this was coming up, and
No.
That could be a resolution.
So what's the point of making them?
Well, that's a good reason, I think. I didn't myself make one this year, in part because I was going to do this workshop, and so I thought, well, whatever I do, I'd want to workshop it later anyways. So I got myself off the hook for once. How many of you made a New Year's resolution this year? Okay, so you did.
Sort of.
Okay. How many of you have broken your resolution yet? You kept yours?
Yeah, well, it's not really like a make or break type of thing. It's not really like a make or break type of thing. It's more
Okay.
like
Aspirational.
a general kind of thing.
Okay. Now, a little bit of other stuff. How many of you are familiar at all with Stoic philosophy? A little bit? Okay.
Well,
I read,
by osmosis.
You should, yeah.
Yeah.
I read The Obstacle's the Way.
What's that?
The Obstacle's the Way.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with that by Ryan Holiday.
No. That's, I think, a treatment of Stoicism, right? Drawing on some other stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to tell you a bit about Stoicism, not so much as you get, say, in a course, but just enough to have some basic familiarity with it and see how things fit in. So this is a school that starts in ancient Athens, the way a lot of other ancient philosophical schools did. That was the place to be. And it gets started with this guy Zeno. After other philosophical schools had taken off, it's what we call a Socratic school. So it traces itself back to Socrates through a couple intermediaries. And it ended up becoming one of the major schools of antiquity. So it was a success story. Some of the other schools disappeared from the scene. And if you're really interested in that, I can talk about that a bit more later. One of the things that Zeno really stressed was a state of, the goal was to have a state of freedom from trouble. And this was a common philosophical aspiration, to live a life that wouldn't be bound up with the sorts of things that get us upset, that disappoint us, and to deal with the strong and upsetting emotions that we all encounter. And they saw this as a way to attain happiness in this life. If you can still the things like anger or envy or hatred or disappointment, and orient yourself towards a better way of living, then you can be happy. They also really stress the need to cultivate our human capacity for rationality, something that they thought we can't take for granted. We all like to think that we're completely rational all the time. Much of the time that we're not is when we really stress that, like for instance when we get angry, we think we're being totally rational, even though from the outside somebody else could look in and say that's not the case. So the Stoics really focused on that. They also, and this is where some people would say, I don't really want to do the Stoic route, they stressed responsibility for the condition that we find ourselves in. So in a certain way that's very liberating, because if somebody tells you you don't have to feel a certain way, you don't have to respond a certain way, that makes it sound like things could get better. The flip side of that, of course, is if you don't want to feel that way or think that way, you have to actually do something about it. You have to make another choice.
What are they doing?
I think they're doing some renovation up there.
Yeah.
Now, where was I? So we have some measure of control over how we feel and what we think. They also had a very strong conception of duty and moral obligation. This is something else that they focused. They thought that we should develop what they called virtues, and a virtue is a good habit of character and eliminate vices. They also, another key aspect of Stoic philosophy, it's not the sort of thing that you could just read and memorize and then immediately apply. You had to practice it. And as a matter of fact, Epictetus, if you read his discourses, he's constantly talking about people who come to his school and they study the books and they parrot the right phrases out at the right moment, but you put them into a real situation, they're totally at sea. So it's through practice that we become better. So Stoicism became a very attractive way of thinking about life in the ancient world, a way of responding to the sorts of troubles that we encounter, not only today, like parking, for example. Parking was not the problem in the ancient world that it was, although traffic was a huge problem in cities. But all the other sort of things that we encounter, neighbors who we don't like, who leave trash out or something like that, relatives who say the wrong thing at the dinner party, any of those sorts of things that we think about today, that was happening back then, and usually just as much of it. So the Stoics were coming up with a way of dealing with this, and it became very attractive to a lot of people. It bears some similarities to some Eastern philosophical approaches coming out of India. It also bears some resemblances to early Christianity as well. Now, all of that said, we don't actually have the texts that these guys wrote for the most part. We have a few of them. Most of them have been lost, unfortunately. It's really unfortunate because I'd like to read these myself. And we have lists of how many books there were and what their titles were, and we possess only a tiny fraction of them. What we do possess is really quite good, though. And so what I'm drawing on here is coming out of one of those texts, this guy Epictetus, who we call a late Stoic. He didn't actually write anything down himself, but one of his students, Arius, wrote down a lot of the stuff that the guy would say after the lessons were over. He had a very good memory. He was a historian. So we're pretty confident that this is what Epictetus actually taught. Epictetus, much later in the 20th century, becomes the basis for cognitive behavior therapy and other sorts of psychotherapeutic approaches of the same type, like rational emotive therapy. And there is a neo-Stoic movement going on today, which is quite strong. Every year we have a Stoic week internationally. There's quite a few people who identify themselves as Stoics. I'm not actually one myself, but I have a lot of friends who do, and so it's something worth checking out. Now, that's all sort of background. Let's get to the stuff that's more practical. There's three concepts of Stoic philosophy that I think are really helpful when it comes to thinking about New Year's resolutions. One of them, I actually made a handout for each one. One of them is what is in our control and what's not in our control. That's a central distinction for the Stoics. Another of them is considering what you're actually committing to. What are the prices of things that you have to think of? And then the third thing is habits and their role in our reasoning processes and our choices and our actions. So let's start by talking about what's actually in our control. If we're sane, if we're not like megalomaniacs or totally off the wall, we recognize there's some things we don't have control over. And the way that the Stoics talk about this is those things that are either in our power or our control or up to us, we get to decide them. Another way of thinking about it, those things that are our business. When we tell somebody that's none of your business, that's another way of thinking about this. Now, one main reason we end up getting upset or disappointed in our expectations or feeling hurt is we mistake things that are not in our control for things that actually are in our control, and we respond to them accordingly. So the Stoics, if we take them in a very simplistic way, And that's what I've got there on the handout in that major part. Almost none of the things that we normally assume and act like are under our control actually are. The Stoics would say our bodies are not actually something that's under our control in any full way. We don't control how other people react. We don't control the weather. We don't control, outbreaks of diseases. We don't control the economy. So if we're acting as if we do have some sort of stake in that, we're probably going to get upset. What is in our power is what we feel, or what we think, what we assent to, what we desire, what we choose. That what we feel is very important. A lot of people have the view, because it's a very common modern view, that we just feel what we feel and we don't have any responsibility or control over that. But the Stoics thought that we actually do have some measure of control over how we feel, our emotional responses. What isn't in our power is anything external to ourselves. So how events turn out, for instance, whether people are doing mechanical work up there, it's not in my control, right? It's not great for filming, but what are you going to do? Other people, power and position, whether you get that job or not, that's somebody else's hiring decision, right? Reputation, how people view us, wealth, possessions. Epictetus and other Stoics think that our bodies are not really in our own control. Things that people tend to fear a lot, like disease, death, poverty, dishonor, we don't really have control over that. What we do have control over, they say, is how we react to those things, how we deal with them, how we interpret them. Now, when we present it like that, it sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it? You say, well, I have control over my body. I can work out or not work out. Or, if I want to eat garbage, I can eat garbage. Or I can actually eat healthy food, I can go to the doctor for annual checkups, or I can say, I'm going to skip that for 20 years, or whatever, right? So Epictetus says, well, we do have some control over some of these things, but it's not complete control. So, think of the examples of these people who, you always know a story or two like this. They're scrupulous about eating right, and running and stuff like that, and then they keel over from a heart attack. And, you say, well, maybe they should have done something else. Well, no, there's only so much that you can do. So we don't have entire control. Finances, another great example. Epictetus is not telling you be spendthrift, don't pay any attention, never do a budget because it's out of your control. But you can do a budget and then unforeseen expenses arise. Or you plan as best as you can and then the economy goes south, like it did in 2008. I think everybody remembers what that was like. He talks about choosing when you take a sea voyage, choose which ship you're going to go on, and you can actually look the captain in the eye and see if he's drunk, and see what the sailors are like. But once you get on that ship and you're embarked, if a storm comes up, it doesn't matter what kind of, at least at that time, it doesn't matter what kind of sailors you've got, you're probably going to shipwreck. Another clarification is we do have some control over whether we develop skills and capacities. So this is a good one for thinking about resolutions, right? Because we often make resolutions, I'm going to learn this language, or I'm going to learn this new skill. We have control over that, whether we develop those skills. We don't necessarily have control over whether our aptitudes are well adapted to those. I'm never going to be, for example, a great draftsman. I used to want to do that. I did a little bit of painting and oil pastels. I was okay with that sort of thing, but I don't have the skill for drawing. And I could spend the time to acquire some measure of it, but I'm never going to be really great at it. But there's other things that you can become good at, and that is up to you. But once you have that, you don't control how your performance is interpreted. If an audience doesn't like what you're playing or putting out, that's up to them. We also do have some control over how we use the things that are external, that aren't really in our control. We have control over what we do with them. We don't determine them entirely, but we can use them well or use them poorly. And that's very important for the Stoics. So that's one important idea. Should I go on to the next, or is there any questions about that? Feel free, by the way, to ask questions at any time.
You don't have to do this. I'm a kinesthetic learner, so it helps me to.
What's that?
I'm a kinesthetic.
Okay.
So I need to use my hands, but if you don't mind.
That's perfectly fine. I've had quite a few students like that in some of my classes.
It's actually kind of a Stoic point.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, it's like if you're aware of what you need and you fulfill your need in order to advance your skill.
Yeah, I mean we've got sometimes like I remember this is a total digression, but we'd have students who'd bring in food and drink in the classroom, and there were rules at some of the places that I taught against doing that, and some of the teachers were really strict about that. And it'd be like right before lunch, for example, and you know that these students are not going to actually make it to lunch, and then to tell them, no, you can't eat anything, you can't drink anything, just listen to my 1 hour lecture instead. That's sort of setting up a situation that's not going to work very well. So I'm entirely sympathetic to that. Well, let's talk about another key theme, which is settling and paying the prices of things. Again, fits in with New Year's resolutions when we think about what we're doing. So in life, all the things that we consider goods or bads, we can rank order them in relation to each other, if we actually put in the time to do that. I'm not suggesting anyone do that right now at this moment with every good or bad thing in your life, but it is something you can do. What we call practical reasoning, in large part, consists in working out for oneself what one ought to do. And a lot of that is based on that kind of ordering principle. Practical reasoning includes some other functions that I've given you there on the handout as well. Now, if we observe a person's choices and actions, or if we look at our own over time, then you can see what a person really does value, what they actually choose, what they prefer, what they make a priority. That's what they're placing at a higher rank. That's what they think has a higher price. They could be mistaken about that. Sometimes we have to revise our views on these sort of things. That's much more reliable than what people say about themselves. Their verbal declarations are not quite the same in most cases as their actions, myself included, by the way. And that's to be expected. What we want to look at then is what people actually do choose, how they set up their life, and we want to look at that in our own cases. So, a classic example from Epictetus, he talked with a guy who's angry with his brother. They got in a fight, and some words were exchanged. Now he's faced with a choice. Does he stick with the anger, which seems very natural? That SOB said that stuff to me. Who does he think he is? There's a reasoning process there that goes along. There's some goods at stake. You don't want to feel like you're backing down. You don't want to be the person to give in and then perhaps get hurt by the person again, to give them the wrong idea. But there's a price that has to be paid. And the question that he asked him is, well, are you going to be a brother to your brother, or are you going to be an enemy to your brother? You have to choose. Which is it going to be? And so, the person has to think, is what we fought about worth the damage to the relationship? Should I treat my brother in this way or that way? What do I give up about myself if I do that? If I decide to treat my brother as an enemy, am I doing harm to myself in the process, my own character? If I pay the price and treat my brother like a brother, will I perhaps buy him off and make him, treat me nice in return? That probably won't happen in most cases. But those are the sort of things that people think about. Now, Stoics think that there is a in general, right and wrong understanding of what is valuable and what isn't valuable, and they articulate it in their philosophy. But they don't expect that everybody's going to automatically recognize it. That's one of the things I find attractive about the Stoics, is they're willing to let us figure these things out on our own through having experiences and then seeing whether things panned out the right way or didn't. Another thing that's very important to think is bringing this back to plans and resolutions. When we make our resolutions, are we making them about things that we really do value? And are we making them about things that we would want to value but actually don't value? And then what would be required? What price do we have to pay for progress when we make a resolution? This is why some resolutions might not be the best to make, even though they look really good on paper or as a Facebook post on January 1st. They might not be rational for us if they require too much that we can't actually shell out. Let me go on to the third general idea, habits. Habits are really important, not only for the Stoics, but for any practical philosophy. In the Stoic point of view, who we fundamentally are as persons, our core personality, is a function of what he calls, in Greek, proiresis. And this comes from a word that means to take, hierarchy, and it's to take one thing instead of another. So somebody who, characteristically makes the choice to stay at work very late and not go home and spend time with their kids, that's a choice. That's a choosing one thing over another. The person who says, no, I'm going to observe some limits and the workday has to end at this time, even though it means I'm not going to get a promotion because I'm going to go to my kid's recital like I think I should. That's another proiresis. That's another choice. You could say prioritization is a way of thinking about it. In the literature, they translate this as faculty of choice or moral purpose, these very high-sounding terms. You can think about it as your will, your faculty of will. And it's all part of what Epictetus calls the ruling faculty, the part of us that makes the decision in the last analysis. Now, the proiresis is what we use to make individual choices. So we often think of individual choices just confined to this situation and this situation and this situation. But it's also something that spans time. That's why it's really the core of the person. That's who we are over time, remaining more or less the same, or if it is changing on a fundamental level. Habits are how that takes place. So that's why habits are so important. You might think of them as sort of like the juncture point between the overall structure of the person and their will and the individual choices that they make. So habits are going to be very important for us, and we want to be mindful about what kind of habits we have and what kind of habits we're building, what kind of habits we'd like to have but don't actually have, that would be required for doing things. Habits also fit in with our processes of reasoning. So it's not just about sort of automatic responses or how we feel. The very ways in which we think are affected by our habits. If we look at things in a certain way, over time, after a while, we'll come to take that as just the way things are. It'll become second nature, you can say. And we can go along with them in a kind of automatic way, which could be good for us if they're good habits, or it could be very bad for us if they're bad habits. Now, Epictetus, one of the things that he cautions us about is once we actually have a bad habit established, it's not an innocent lapse if we fail. So if I have a tendency towards greed, and that's something that's been going on in my life for a while, and I give in, I'm not just giving in at that moment in time, I'm strengthening the habit. I'm making it more difficult for me to resist it next time around. Same thing goes for going against a habit. When you struggle against temptation and the routine that you've got, you say, I'm going to do something different, it's really hard at first, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the things with New Year's resolutions. We make them at the worst time of the year, actually. As we'll talk about in a moment. And when you do it, why should you try to do something tough on a day that you're probably hungover? It's really bad advice, When you do something to break a habit, after a while it gets easier. You think about physical addictions, is a great example. I used to smoke cigarettes. I still smoke cigars occasionally, and I quit many times. And the reason I quit many times is I didn't stay quit. But I remember, that first day of going without cigarettes. Oh, it was terrible, And it would get bad for, out to about day 3 or day 4, and then it would start to get a little bit better because now you're changing your habit. You start to find other things to do with your fingers. That was a tough one. Other things to do with your mouth. Other ways to fill the time, those intervals of 5 minutes that you used to get to. Other reasons to go outside. But that's what it takes. So the upshot is that we really have to be honest with ourselves. If we want to make improvements in our life, we have to be very honest with ourselves about our bad habits, the habits that we're able to identify for ourselves as bad, and perhaps even feel bad about. And then we want to think about what we would need to do to replace them with good habits. And all of us do have bad habits. I've got a whole bunch of them myself, so I'm not preaching this as something from on high that everybody should change or something like that. This is just something I found very useful to rework some of the wrinkles out of one's life. So now, all that said, any questions about Stoic principles or philosophy before we talk about New Year's resolutions per se?
Where does the word, obviously the word Stoic comes from Stoicism, but that's really my only knowledge of it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, I'm waiting for the aha moment, and I haven't gotten it yet as to how that.
They were the guys of the porch. Porch in Greek is stoa. And it's like pure chance that it got called that.
Okay.
So Zeno, he taught at this place called the Stoa Poikile, which means painted porch. And at first they called his followers Zenonians, and it didn't stick. So they started calling them the people of the Stoa, and then they just started calling them Stoics. And then, most of the time that Stoicism has been around, it's not been done from porches. But, that's the association with it. So, yeah. It's interesting because a lot of other philosophical movements are Platonist, right, named after Plato, or Epicureans, named after Epicurus. But this is named after a particular spot.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right, so let's think about New Year's resolutions as a practice that we engage in. Traditionally, New Year's has been understood in 2 main different ways. One, I think probably the more prevalent one in our own society is a time to party and engage in excess. Other people have looked at it as a time to sort of engage in quiet reflection and take stock of the year before. Sometimes people try to combine the 2 of them, not always effectively, because the excess can sort of wipe that out. Now, if we reflect on resolutions in previous years, I've made all sorts of New Year's resolutions that I haven't been able to make. One that I've made several years in a row was, this is the year I'm finally going to buckle down and learn Mandarin. Because I took a course in Mandarin back in college, so we're talking about over 20 years ago, and I still have the textbook for it. And I thought I'll work my way through this textbook, and I started a few times and never actually made it through. I've also said I'm going to drop 50 pounds and get in shape. Not argue with my wife at all for the coming year.
He does. He's achieved that.
No. It's very rare that anybody achieves that sort of thing, But I haven't been successful with those. But partly because those were not very realistic ways of framing things. Now, how many of you have made successful New Year's resolutions where at least 1 year you succeeded? None at all?
I mean, I don't think I make a resolution every
Okay.
year. I think sometimes I'll think I'm just going to be more something, and it's generalized, and then I really have no measurement.
Well, that's what you said you did for this year, right? That's one strategy to make sure that it doesn't fail. That's right. Make it
You
general.
have to wait until December 31st to figure out how you did.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's one way to make a resolution successful, is to make it sort of not have any criteria. Make it vague, aspirational. Who's made unsuccessful resolutions in previous years? I know I have. So why were they unsuccessful?
Too vague.
Okay, that can be a problem.
Not, follow through. We didn't say what the steps were exactly I was going to take.
Yeah. That's what you mean by follow through, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the big issues is people will say, I'm going to drop 50 pounds, and then, how's that going to happen? Well, I'm just going to lose weight. Well, that's a circular thing, right? Those are the same meaning right there. What do you have to do in order to lose weight? Well, there's only so many ways that this happens in terms of physics. I mean, you could go and do, some surgery, and that would take some weight off, but that's a little extreme. Generally, there's only two ways other than getting sick to lose weight, and one of them involves eating less, and eating less bad food. The other involves exercising more, and it's hard to get around those two. So if you're not going to, like you said, spell out what you have to do, it's not going to happen. And then once you start saying something like, "Well, I'm going to eat less," that's still pretty vague, isn't it? How much less are you going to eat? How are you going to get through that? These are all the sort of things that you have to think out to see them through. Now, our goal here isn't to sort of ruminate over past failures or commiserate, but rather to sort of engage in analysis of matters that a lot of the times we'd rather leave behind. So one of the worksheets that I actually have for you has to do with resolutions that people made this year. Now, who made resolutions this year?
Did.
Okay. So I actually, did one that I made in previous years, and I filled it out. Lose 50 pounds, and then, charted out what that would be. And then, it probably needs to be reformulated. When did you make your resolutions? Those of you who did. Did you make them on New Year? Okay, so you did.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes,
you,
I have.
yeah, that's the common time.
I tend to make a resolution on my birthday every year too.
Okay,
It's like a new year and a different way, I guess.
that's probably a better time to do it in many respects.
Wasn't
Rather
successful
than
with that one
January-
either, but
rather than
I made
January
it.
1st.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same resolution actually.
Here's a key question. Why did you decide on the resolutions that you decided on?
It should be a priority.
Okay.
Health is very important.
Yeah. I think it's more important the older you get too. I can tell you that. Why did you decide on the resolutions you decided on?
I thought that it was sort of like a one resolution to rule them all approach. I figured if I mastered this resolution, there were several sub-resolutions that would actually come to pass. But no, I mean, I think it's too ambitious, in terms of why I've already failed on the 13th of the first month of the new year.
Yeah.
Is because I anticipated that I would actually have control over the things that your little chart reminds me that I don't control.
Yeah.
And didn't take enough agency over the things that I did have control over.
It could work if if you were thinking of something that would then enable other things to happen, right?
Yeah.
But if it's something that encompasses a whole bunch of other things, yeah, it's probably...
Well, I can share what it is, if
Okay.
that helps sort of put it into context. But I had made a resolution that I was going to meditate every day, and that I was going to get up from my work at least once an hour and do some sort of stretching exercise, breathing exercise, break away from...
That's very concrete, which is good.
Yeah, and I figured if I did that would help me to do other things more effectively, to be more agreeable, which would be a good resolution, or,
Yeah.
To just sort of prioritize my time a little bit better, so I was conscious of what I was doing, and then, 50 minutes up to that 10-minute break every hour. But I think it was broken Monday the 4th was the,
Yeah.
it was that fast where I went a whole day and didn't realize that I hadn't done what I said I wanted to do. So.
Well, that was a good one that would, if it was practiced, probably make other resolutions easier to follow through on.
Yeah.
So that was the one resolution to rule them all.
I thought so. I thought it would help me instill more calm.
Yeah.
I find it funny that we didn't actually talk about our resolutions this year at all.
You and me?
Yeah, we're
Well,
married.
that's because we were doing this workshop.
I guess I was holding out, right? I was waiting
Saving it.
I wanted to be successful. I wanted to on the 13th say, I'm keeping mine, but no, you know.
Yeah. What was? Do you mind sharing what your resolution
No,
was?
so mine was very general, just to drink less alcohol.
That's that's not actually that general. That's something you can measure.
It's pretty simple.
Kind of.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, but the problem is I have nothing to measure it against. It's just kind of.
no baseline.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I drank last year. I just have, a very kind of broad idea of what I would drink maybe per week.
Yeah.
Like a felt
So,
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's just kind of, if I had one night instead of doing that, maybe stop during the week, something like that. Like during
Yeah.
the day. So it's just kind of vague. Like there's nothing to base it against is the problem.
Yeah, it's not vague in how it's formulated.
Yeah.
You just don't have a comparative baseline. Is what you're
It's
saying.
hard to know if you're successful.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, one
And I
way
mean,
you can be totally successful is don't drink any alcohol at all.
Yeah,
That would
that's
be
just not going to happen. That's the problem.
Yeah. Now, why did you make that resolution?
Honestly, it was I'm trying to control my health.
Okay. That's one that goes back all the way to classic times. You find all of the great philosophers talking about regulating not just food but drinking. All right, so let's think about what's reasonable and what's unreasonable about how we make our resolutions. One of the things right off the bat, it's not that reasonable to make a resolution for an entire year at a time that we don't really have enough time, which is the holidays. The way it works out for us here in the West typically is, it's rush to get everything done, and then we have, this whole period from Christmas to New Year's where parties are happening and your routine is totally off, and by the end of it you might actually be tired of that sort of thing and be ready to get back to the routine. And that's not a good frame of mind to be in to try to make some good determination about how to fix one's life or even just to make minor changes.
It actually starts even sooner. I mean, if you think about it from
Thanksgiving.
Halloween, yeah.
Yeah.
Then there's Thanksgiving, Hanukkah. I mean, there's a million things in there that
Oh yeah. The
interact.
office parties,
Yeah.
potential fallout from office parties.
The Christmas parties.
Yeah. Now, another thing that we often go wrong with is focusing on framing matters in terms of just one single thing, rather than looking at broader patterns. Like, it makes sense that you would say, I want to be healthier, so now you focus in on one particular thing, but understanding that there's a broader pattern of health, or wanting to be more productive or relaxed, that's a broader thing. Another thing from a Stoic perspective that is problematic is setting goals for ourselves that really depend on other persons or things to work, for things to align the right way. If we focus on what's up to us, we're probably going to be a lot more successful than if we make goals. Well, one of the ones when I was reading through literature on this, people would make goals like, my family will spend more time outdoors. Now, that's not a very good resolution to make, because you're not making it just for yourself, which you could have some control over. You're instead making it about everybody else who has to go along for the ride if you're going to possibly be successful. There's two other things, too. It's probably better to think in terms of months rather than entire year. When you're first starting out with trying to make change, why pick a year? Why not try to do it month by month by month and reevaluate? The other thing is we often forget that success is going to be something that's earned, as I'd like to say, despite failures. When we have a resolution, so the tendency is to say, oh, I broke it. Forget about it then, right? But it was a good resolution that you made. It would be good to go back to it. But we have this tendency, once we've hit a New Year's resolution that we've lost, to say, I've lost the battle.
Yeah, because it's like you skip meditating once and then it's like, it's gone. So if it was me, that was what I would do. But like hearing you, it's like that's crazy. Like you can just do it the next day.
Yeah.
It's every single day in a row. If you skip one day, you can go back to it. But if it was me, I would have done the same thing as you. But seeing somebody else doing it, you can see how it looks.
It's almost like it's enculturated in the way where you think that
Yeah.
you need to, once you've blown it, and that the year itself is meaningful. But it is the daily practice, right? I think, but it's very difficult to think of that.
It's that, and it's the fact that if we're being realistic or being rational about the resolutions that we've made them precisely because we think this is an area where we need to change things, right? Change is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier later on after we've already put in work and established a new pattern. But at the start, we're going to fail, most likely. And so if we have the mindset, which is up to us, we control how we interpret these things. If we have the mindset that, if I fail once, the whole game is over, then we're not going to be successful in dealing with these resolutions and the changes that they're about. If we take a different tack and we say, well, the realistic thing is to expect myself to fail, not to want to fail, but to say, all right, what do I do now? Epictetus talks about Stoicism. You should be like a wrestler who realizes that he's going to lose bouts. And what do you do when you lose a bout? You say, oh, well, my wrestling career is done, or you dust yourself off and get back up and then go to the next bout. Now, the handout that I've got for you for the worksheet 1, the goal here is to analyze resolutions we actually made. So you could take a resolution that you actually did make this year. You could take a resolution you made in the past. You could take a resolution that you think you should have made. And what I've got here is a number of different considerations. We make a resolution. That's the first part. And then that follow-through that you were talking about, that's the what does it take to fulfill. We have to think about how we would actually do that. And then there's this important checklist. This is from a Stoic perspective. Is it actually possible for me to fulfill this thing that I'm saying? If my goal is to not only lose 50 pounds, but to become a bodybuilder and go into bodybuilding competitions and win the competition, that's not, quite frankly, that's not attainable for me anyway at this point in my life. But that's not going to happen in the coming year. Another thing to think is, do my choices fundamentally determine success in this matter, or is something else determinative of that? Do you have the resources needed in order to realize the resolution, or is it something that's beyond you? And then, think to yourself, will this actually significantly improve my life? If you can answer yes to all of those, then that's a resolution that you could be successful with and could make things better.
I have a question
Yeah.
or a comment. So one resolution that I commonly make is like, I'm going to exercise more this year.
Yeah.
And like I'm kind of going through the checklist and I'm thinking about, the idea that our bodies are kind of outside of our control.
Yeah.
So, but it is a resolution that you mostly have control over. You can choose to or choose not to, but there are other outside forces that could impede you from doing that.
Yeah.
That then,
Like if you get sick.
right,
Exactly.
if I got sick or had an injury or something,
Yeah.
that could prevent me from doing that.
Yeah. So it's not something that you have, like I said, total control over. But you're thinking about my choices fundamentally determine success
Right.
in this matter.
Yeah.
How we use our body is more or less up to us, Epictetus says. We don't control all the outcomes. So that would be one. Exercise more. That could work. That would be you'd also want to look at what does it take to fulfill part. What prevents us from exercising more? I'm a great example. We have that gym in our building. I haven't used it once. Why not? Is it a matter of not having the time? No, I could find the time. It's not making the time, and spending perhaps too much time on work. Those would be the sort of things that you put it in what does it take to fulfill part. And then, the other thing I think is very important when you're filling this out is to think about why you want success in that matter. Why? It's easy to say, well, it's a good thing for me to do this or do that. Is it something you really want yourself? And then why? To articulate it for yourself is very important.
That's what I was asking, looking at the checklist, I'm looking at the last one. Fulfilling this resolution will significantly improve my life. It's like, I don't drink what would be considered an unhealthy amount as it is. So it's like drinking less, theoretically would is obviously better.
Less calories.
Yeah, but
it's not like you're
will it actually, will my life be better at the end? I don't know.
So that's where it would be useful to think about other things that could come along with that. Like, for example, a greater experience of self-control. Making a resolution and then being able to look back at it and say, maybe I didn't need to do this, but I decided I was going to do it, and now I did it. That, again, though, like Epictetus would say, if that's not motivating you, somebody else can't come in from the outside and say, that should motivate you. You have to look and see what actually does motivate you. Maybe that's a resolution that you don't actually need to keep as your resolution. Maybe pick something different too. If you don't find some intrinsic value or satisfaction in succeeding with it.
I think that's why we're attracted to drink less or exercise more or whatever, because the metric isn't as specific, and so
spend more time with my kids.
Yeah, but to your point, maybe saying something like, I will meditate, 60% more. That seems a little nerdy. I understand that, but the idea of just creating something that is attainable, that doesn't embody the perfect 100% commitment.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where it's very easy to get thrown off.
That's true. You do have to have that baseline, though, if you're going to make a metric like that.
Yeah.
So, like with the drinking,
so like
you
3
don't know
times a
exactly
week or
how
something.
much.
Yeah.
So there it's a matter of how you formulate it. So that's a good way to do it. From this point forward, I'm going to do it X amount of time rather than I'm going to do it 50% more or something like that. Once you've got a baseline, I suppose you could from year to year do whatever you want. But
My problem is I tend to take on too much stuff at once, and then I get overwhelmed by all the resolutions I made, and then just give up on all of them. That's why I decided not to make any this year.
Because in the past you made multiple ones. I've done that myself.
I've said, even not resolutions, I set goals, and I'll take on exercising every day, eating right, and.
If you have to put it into a whole chart, it's probably too many. It's been my experience, and I usually don't manage to succeed in any of them. And then you feel bad about it, which is the real problem. Not only do you fail, which sets up a pattern, it sets up a sort of larger habit of making resolutions and then not being able to follow through on them. Then there's that feeling that I can't actually follow through. Again, from the Stoic perspective, that's something we could sort of dig into and undo. Another thing I want to mention too about this as you're looking at that worksheet, it's okay to revise your resolutions over time. It's okay to decide after failing or succeeding that it wasn't a very reasonable resolution to make in the first place, and perhaps it should be reformulated or substituted. While you're looking at that, I've got a few things that, from a Stoic perspective, about New Year's resolutions. If we're looking at things from a Stoic perspective, probably what we should do is consider what would really make us more free from trouble or anxiety or negative emotional responses. So, again, like the cutting back on alcohol, one of the things you'd want to question is, do you use it for conviviality? Would it be counterproductive to spend less time with friends having a beer Or, you cut back on it because you find that when you drink, I'm not by any means suggesting this is the case with you, but that you become irritated with people and, prone to argument. Well, then that might be a good reason to cut back, One of the things we want to do is think about areas of our life where we find ourselves still making bad choices. Choices that we know are bad, that we recognize to be bad choices. And then justifying them. That's usually a sign that we've got a habit there. If we not only make a bad decision, but then we have reasons why we're making it, and we still also know it's a bad decision, then we know that there's something to work on there. We also have to consider whether what we'd like to change really lies in our power. So, think about money, for example. It feels like money would make us more free. What would it take to get more of it? A lot of times people will make New Year's resolutions. What's that?
Oh, yeah. Tonight's the night to hear it in the news.
I did not want to think of that.
Yeah, whoever gets that one is really going to be set. But
Yeah, right.
this is a total digression. I used to sell lottery tickets. I worked at a gas station. And I saw so much misery coming about because of that.
That's what motivates people to buy into that really ridiculous.
They would get very upset. I would have people who would, there were a couple of different irrational behaviors I observed. One was people would come in and with the scratch-offs, they'd say, which ones are doing well? And I was, just a clerk at a gas station. I don't know which ones are doing well. Then they'd get angry at me because I was holding out on them. They were convinced that I was keeping the good ones for my friends. And I'd be like, they come off the same role here, but I wasn't giving them what they wanted. And then there were some people who would come in, and in general you get anywhere from like 50 to 60% back on a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
And they'd come in and buy $50 worth, and they'd scratch them all off, looking for the big win. And they'd win about $30 back. And then they'd turn that $30 back into lottery tickets and scratch those off. And pretty soon it would go down to nothing. And every once in a while somebody would win a $50, $100, $200 thing out of that. But most of the time they'd be doing that. And they'd always come out much more unhappy than they were coming in. That was my general observation. But when it comes to other things having to do with money, we can make resolutions. I'm going to make more money this year. Well, how are you going to make that more money? What sort of things are you going to have to do? What sort of compromises of other values will you have to engage in to do that? And then, is money really up to us in any case? We also want to consider the dimension of habit, too. What habits stand in our way? So if I'm going to say, for example, like I put here, lose 50 pounds, maybe I need to question the habit of having, snacks at night. Maybe that can't be a regular occurrence if I want that to happen. Maybe I have to think about habits that I don't have, like going to the gym and using the...
Eating veggies.
What's that?
Or eating veggies.
Yeah, exactly. Portion control, all these sorts of things. Those are matters of habit. That's a dimension that we often overlook. And like I said before, we ought to realize that we're going to fail. And fail more often at the start than after we've been working at it for a while. It's counterproductive for us to decide that we're going to do really well at the start and then taper off. It should work the other way around, where whatever we do pick, we probably fail in it the first week. And then we fail less the next week, and then we fail less the next week, and perhaps after a while don't fail at all. One of the other things that's very important is what can we do to keep ourselves mindful and attentive and making progress? How do we take stock, not at the very end of the year, but over time, from day to day and week to week? And the third worksheet that I've got for you is, if you want to use that sort of thing, would be the kind of thing that Stoic would suggest using, where you put down what your resolution is, and then each day you kind of keep track of it. You decide for yourself. You think out, what can I do daily or weekly? What is concrete about that? For the taking time to meditate, I think that's a pretty straightforward one. You actually have to stop at certain points. But one of the things that goes with that concretely might be I need to set an alarm to make sure that I actually do this. And then each day you would write down whether it worked, whether it didn't work, and then you look at it over time. This is something, by the way, that the Stoics did. They would keep track and they would assess at the end of the day how they did. Some of them would write it down in a little book called the Libellum. Others would just remember it and do what nowadays people call an examination of conscience or a sum up at the end of the day. The Stoics did that as a regular practice. So let's think about our resolutions then, in light of the three Stoic core concepts. So what can we actually work on? Fundamentally, we can work on our attitudes and mindsets and desires and aversions, our feelings and our thoughts. We can work on our relationships and our roles. We can work on developing our talents and capacities. We can work on how we use externals, like using our body or using alcohol or using time. But we have to recognize what's actually not in our power and what role that's going to play in our success or our failures. We also have to consider our commitments. What do we also need to do when we choose these things? All of us are busy people. And so when we decide we're adding something new, there's probably going to have to be something else that we cut back on. Now, in the case of yours, it's a little bit different because you're actually taking something out of the picture, right? I know, like, yeah, what do you replace it with?
Water.
That'd probably be good. You'll be much less dehydrated.
That's right, exactly.
You could just replace it with coffee, but then, diuretic.
That's right.
Yeah. So the second worksheet, I think, is useful for that. And the reason I have it set up like that, you notice it starts out and finishes the same way that the first worksheet did. The resolution I'm making is a goal for the current year, what counts as success. But then if you want to make it work for you, you've got to break it down into what is it really going to take to make this resolution happen. So I put it in terms of prices you have to pay. 3 is an arbitrary number. It just happens to fit very nicely on the handout. There could be 10, there could be 1, it all depends. But, like in my case, if I revise my resolution from lose 50 pounds, which is rather arbitrary, to live a healthier lifestyle in terms of my body, what prices would I have to pay? I could put down, for example, I need to exercise regularly. That's something I need to put in. That's something I need to pay. I also put down get regular sleep. That's if you want to be healthy, that's not about diet, but that is pretty important, and it is something I can certainly fix. And notice that each of them leads to 3 other considerations. What desires and aversions do we have that we have to look at, that might stand in our way, that could raise problems for us? What beliefs or judgments do we have that we find standing in our way? Those things that lead to rationalizations that take us away from, in my case, for exercise. I just don't have the time. Well, I have the time, and so I'm actually committing here. I'm going to start exercising. And then habits. What habits do we have that are problematic? And what habits do we want to replace those with? If you break it down like that, this is, again, what the Stoics would advise doing, I think that it's a lot easier to fulfill resolutions when you're paying attention to them in this way. Because you can think of something that you're doing that you don't automatically associate with your resolution, but now that you see that it has an integral role to play, you say, that's not what I should be thinking here. Or, boy, this desire is awfully strong right here. Or this aversion, this aversion to going down to the gym is very strong. I need to pay attention to that. It helps you be mindful about what's going on in the pattern of your life, and that makes it easier to then succeed with the resolution. So I think if you take whatever resolutions you want to make, and you kind of put them through this process. It can be very, very productive. We can, with what we've got, left of the time, if you want, we can go through those, or we can talk about how we might make resolutions, or any other topics that you guys want to hit on.
I just have one other question.
Sure.
Just going back, how would the Stoics of, let's say, the original Stoics, what would their opinions on, say, the afterlife would have been? Because I know when we talk about like the Epicureans, they're just like, it's over, enjoy yourself while you're here.
Yeah.
Type of
Not too much though.
So
The Epicureans were kind of down on excess. Well, we normally think of Epicureans as like indulge in everything, but Epicurus himself said, don't drink much wine. Sexual pleasure almost always gets you in trouble. Try to avoid that if possible. So it's it's not simple food, because the other stuff upsets your stomach. So the Stoics were like the Epicureans. They were materialists. They thought that the mind is actually something corporeal. They tended to think about it as something like super fine matter, but it was still something that would get destroyed. So there wasn't any like you remaining after death. Epictetus actually said something interesting in one of the discourses. He talks about death, and he says, when death finds me, I would like it to find me still making progress. And he said, well, why? I mean, what the hell good is that? But it was tied to his way of life. And he was a teacher of Stoicism who himself would admit that he wasn't already 100% there too, which I think is very important too.
Did they believe
Go ahead.
Did they believe it was ever possible to be 100% there, or did they think it was like an ideal environment?
So that's a great question, and that is something that there's some disagreement about among the Stoics themselves. They talked about it in terms of the sage or the wise person, and some of them maintained that nobody of that sort ever existed. Some of them said no, they did exist, like Socrates is an example of that, or they liked Hercules a lot too. They thought of Hercules as being a Stoic figure. Later on, some of the later Stoics would say, well, look, what about these early founders of Stoicism, Zeno and Cleanthes and Chrysippus? After Epictetus died, people often looked at him and said, well, he's an example of the Stoic sage. But when with Epictetus at least, we have somebody saying, yeah, I'm not the Stoic sage. I haven't completed it. So it's even if none of them were 100%, like you were saying, it is an ideal. It's a pattern that you can get closer to. And it's not something that you would want to do just for its own sake. You would want to do it because it leads to a happier life, to less troubles, to getting what you actually want more often. That's why it's a practical philosophy rather than just a theoretical kind of thing. So do you now that you've seen all of this, do you think this would make it easier for you to work through resolutions?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe make me think about it more, as opposed to just arbitrarily
Deciding this. Yeah. I'm not saying that next New Year's Eve you should whip out these handouts and say to everybody, now, before we make any resolutions,
Hand it out at the party.
that might be a buzzkill. Maybe don't make the New Year's resolutions at the party. Make them, like the week after. You're no longer hungover,
Or on the press day, I like that.
that is a good one.
Because then it's a little more yours too. That was
That's
one thing
true.
I wanted to ask you when you said, now I've said I'm going to do this. What would the sort of Stoic belief be about like this public airing of the resolution? Like I'm committing to do this, and by saying it in front of this audience, I've somehow made it
And my saying, I'm
on YouTube.
finally going to lose weight.
What's
well-
the position on that?
Well, I mean, you don't control how other people see things.
Right, but is there a validity to sharing it and publicly stating it? Like, would there be the idea that you're kind of making yourself accountable to the people who would support you? Would that go under?
Well, you're also making yourself vulnerable to anybody who wants to say, "Look at that guy. He says he's going to do stuff and then doesn't do it." Again, the Stoics stressed over and over again, we don't control how other people view us. We could use other people as like accountability partners.
Yeah.
That would
could be a
choice on our
fulfillment
part.
point, right? Like.
Yeah, I mean, if I know that I have a problem with holding myself accountable, it would be rational for me to say to somebody else, "Hey, hold me accountable," right? If I don't need that sort of thing, then an accountability partner could actually be a waste of time for some people, I think.
Yeah.
There's also the this is why people like to do things together. There's a kind of confirming that happens when people have made a decision, like they're going to think about Weight Watchers, right? People lose weight together, or people are exercise partners, or they sign up for a class together. There's a sharing that goes on, and they can hold each other. And when somebody starts to flag, they say, "Come on, keep going." I think that's very helpful for many people. So the Stoics would say, figure out whether that really works for you or not. But it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. Some people might find it just incredibly irritating.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
You mentioned this Aristotelian.
Yeah.
I hope I pronounced it right. I'm not familiar with Aristotle that much.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what's the difference?
Okay, that's a good question. So that was another one of the big 5 schools in ancient philosophy. You had Plato's school, you had Aristotle's school, the Stoics, the Epicureans, and then these people called the skeptics. And on a lot of things, the Stoics and the school of Aristotle, the Aristotelians, were pretty well aligned. They thought you should be a good person. They thought, you want to live a rational life. Where they ended up disagreeing was about things like the value of emotions. For example, anger. The Stoics thought that anger was always a bad thing, and anything you could do through anger, you could probably do better calmly using reason. So anger didn't serve any purpose and was likely to lead us astray. The Aristotelians actually thought that there are situations in which you should get angry. And if you don't get angry, there's something wrong with you. You're actually, you have a bad habit then. So that was like one clear demarcation point. The Stoics also thought that in order to be happy, really all you needed was self-control and developing good habits. The Aristotelians thought you need some other things too. You need friendships, you need a certain amount of material wealth or prosperity to have security. The Stoics said you could actually be happy without that. So they thought of the Aristotelians as kind of on the way, but misguided in certain respects, giving priority to the way. What else? Those are some of the big differences between them. And they talked about different topics, too. I think Aristotle spent a lot more time talking about friendship, for example, than the Stoics did. There were some people who combined them in ancient philosophy. Like Cicero, for example, was what we call an eclectic. That he would take what he liked from this guy, sort of like a smorgasbord or a buffet, right? You want to have some pizza, but you also like the soup, and maybe a salad too, right? Take what you like. So Cicero drew on the Stoics and the Aristotelians and blended their stuff together in a very successful way, I think. I'm a big fan of him. Tell.
What's his name?
Cicero, Cicero. Yeah, he was a Roman, not just philosopher, but also a lawyer and a statesman. and he ended up on the wrong side of Caesar. Really on the wrong side. He supported Pompey, which was a bad move back then. When you support the guy who is fighting the Civil War against the other guy, and that guy loses, you pretty much lose everything in the process. Another thing again, total digression. Cicero really liked the Stoics. He thought that the Stoics had ideas about like grief, for example, death, right? The afterlife, that you shouldn't really grieve. Death isn't really a major problem. Cicero had his daughter die, and she died young, and he was very attached to her, and he thought the Stoics are dead wrong on this. And he wrote a book specifically about that, where he talks about that. Maybe we'll do a workshop down the line about that. So, but the next workshop will be about friendship and romantic relations and the kinds of values that we place on using Aristotle for Valentine's Day. Hopefully, it won't lead to anybody.
We might even have treats, right? We were going to try to do that.
That's
for
probably a
Helen.
good idea for Valentine's Day. Yeah.
Chocolates.
Yeah.
I mean, not to dissuade anyone from their goal of healthy eating, but chocolate is supposed to be pretty good for you, right?
To have dark chocolate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be good. Well,
Any other questions or comments or follow-up stuff?
What's your YouTube channel? I read you online.
do you have a current time?
I do, yeah. I'll hand out my cards. Everybody who's watching this will already be watching the channel. So.
Obviously.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks for coming in on a blustery night. Come to the next one, and we'll continue this throughout the year.